Let's bring in top Middle East experts to discuss the situation on the ground and President Obama's policies. Former Army Vice Chief of Staff, retired four-star General Jack Keane, Senator Kelly Ayotte, who's on the Armed Services Committee, and Dennis Ross, who served as the Mideast negotiator to 4 U.S. presidents. All of you, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Thanks, Chris.
Glad to be here.
General Keane, I'd like to start with that map over your shoulder, which you presented to the Senate Armed Services Committee this week. What do you think it demonstrates?
Well, I think, first of all, the United States is confronting a security challenge at a scale that's not seen since post-World War II, with the rise of the Soviet Union superpower and also with the spread of communism globally. What we see on the map is radical Islam morphing into a global jihad, and also the Iranian state-sponsored terrorism and the state itself seeking domination, represented by green on that map, as it begins to control and influence some of the major countries in the Middle East, and certainly influence or control those capitals.
Ambassador Ross, I mean, the map is stunning, and as you look at that spread of Islamic extremism across the Middle East and now into North Africa, are we winning or losing the war against Islamic extremism?
Look, at this point, basically, they're fighting each other. The Iranians are fighting ISIS. In a sense, we may want both sides to lose, but the fact is, we also have to find a way to ensure that the non-Islamists in the region begin to gain. What you would hope to see over the next couple of years is everywhere the radical Islamists are on the move, they begin to lose, they begin to see reverses, and we begin to see the non-Islamists in the region, we begin to see them advance.
But you're not seeing that on that map.
No, you're not seeing it right now. We have an approach right now as it relates to ISIS that I think at this point still hasn't resolved a fundamental problem. You cannot defeat ISIS in Iraq unless, in fact, you deal with the problem of Syria. If you're only attacking the ISIS targets in Syria and allowing Assad to attack the non-ISIS targets, you're creating a problem for yourself. You're going to have to resolve that contradiction if you're going to have a strategy that's effective.
I want to go back, Senator Ayotte, to the big picture and to that map and the Obama administration's continued refusal to say that we are in a war with Islamic extremism. Here this week is Secretary of State John Kerry.
Today we are witnessing nothing more than a form of criminal anarchy, a nihilism which illegitimately claims an ideological and religious foundation.
Senator Ayotte, why does it matter what we call our enemies in the region?
It very much matters because you have to define your enemy. And here's the problem. I think they should spend less time on being worried about being politically correct about how we define our enemies and more time on a strategy to defeat them. One of the things we heard consistently this week from the national security experts, including General Keane, was a lack of a strategy that it was very disjointed what's happening, and what we see is more outgrowth of these extremist groups in the region.
Well, I want to pick up on that. And in fact, the reason that I wanted to do the panel this week is because you had some of our leading national security thinkers really sounding the alarm. It almost seemed in a way like a tipping point. Let's put some of them up on the screen. Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, retired head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, said this: "You cannot defeat an enemy you do not admit exists." And General James Mattis, former head of U.S. Central Command, which had responsibility for the Middle East, said we need to come out from our reactive crouch and take a firm strategic stance in defense of our values. Which raises the question, and you addressed it in the little clip we had in our opening, General King, do we have a winning strategy at this point against Islamic extremism?
Well, anybody looking at that map, our viewers just looking at it, would come to the conclusion, which is obvious. We do not. Al-Qaeda has grown fourfold in 5 years. ISIS, which began when we pulled out politically and militarily from Iraq, grew from an organization of less than 3,000 to an organization over 30,000 in 3 years. Radical Islam is spread from Western Africa through the Middle East all the way to South Asia, the sub-Indian continent. What is the strategy to stop it? We have not stopped it, and we certainly don't have a strategy to defeat it. It is absolutely compelling. What is our strategy? We use drones to kill al-Qaeda leadership in Pakistan and also in Yemen. That's a vital tactic. We should use it, but it's not a strategy. We partner with very selective countries in Africa to help them do some training. That's fragmented at best. There's no overall strategy. Until we bring the countries that are involved and also those that have interest together and put together an alliance and establish a strategy, we're not going to be able to push effectively against this.
Ambassador Ross, let me pick up with you. I mean, we talk about four presidents. You were a special assistant for the Mideast for this president, President Obama, for his first 2 years in office. So it's not like you're a knee-jerk critic of this president. And it's not just the spread of Islamic militants. Let's put this on the map, because it's also Iran, which we now see its influence is spreading to Baghdad and Damascus and Beirut and Sana'a. If the threat is radical Islam, does the president have a sound strategy, both militarily and also in terms of messaging, to deal with Islamic extremism? And what do we need to do differently or better?
Well, a couple of points. First, I think, Senator, your point on not being reluctant to identify who the enemy is essential, because we have to say who it is that we're actually fighting. When you look at that map and you see Iran being on the move, you see radical Islamism as reflected by Iran, fighting radical Islamism as reflected by, I would say, ISIS, the Muslim Brotherhood. We have to decide radical Islam, whether it's Sunni or it's Shia, is the enemy. And we have to then begin to work with those who see that as a threat to them. We shouldn't be reluctant to call it Islamic radicalism, precisely because there are those within the Middle East who see it as a threat, and they're the ones ultimately who have to discredit it. We cannot discredit radical Islam. They're going to have to discredit it. But I'll give you one simple
But if we're
word.
not even acknowledging that that's what the problem is, it's going to be hard to get the people in the region to discredit it and fight it.
We have to be prepared to be forthright on it. They also have to see that we're prepared to fight it. They have to see that we're prepared to support those who are prepared to fight it. And we then have to be prepared to invest in a way that allows us to succeed with them.
Senator Ayotte, I mean, what do we do? I mean, we talk about these coalitions. Yes, we've got the Jordanians flying a couple of sorties and things like that. But what do we do when you see that map? It's like there's the fire alarm is ringing.
There is a fire alarm ringing, Chris. And I think what we do is they're expecting American leadership in terms of bringing us together. They have to take the fight there. We help them with the capacity. They have to have the will. But right now, I think many of those in the Arab nations are looking to us that we could work with and saying, can we count on them? Will they stick with their word? And I think that's one of the problems we face. So as we look at an overall strategy, yes, we can't do all the fighting, and they need to step up against radical Islam, no question. But as leaders, we need to bring people together. They need to be able to count on us. And we have to make sure, Chris, all the way.
And you don't think at this point our so-called allies in the region feel they can depend on this president?
Unfortunately, I don't. And I think that there have been many instances. One of the things we took from the testimony in the Armed Services Committee I heard this week was also our word has to matter. And I think there's a real concern out there that not only a lack of a strategy, but in order to be a leader, to bring everyone together, to work together, you have to be able to be counted on. I think that's a real worry.
General Keane, Lieutenant General Flynn, the former head of Defense Intelligence, compared what we need to do in this region now to the U.S. and allied effort against the Nazis in World War II, to, and you mentioned it, the Cold War and the West's effort against the Soviets. Give me specific ideas. What do we need to be doing?
Well, I think we can be informed by beating the Nazis with brute force and beating the Soviet Union, I think, with better ideas. But most importantly, we formed alliances in NATO and in the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization to contain communism. That's what we need here. We need to come together and form alliances. This is not about, our viewers shouldn't think, and looking at that map, that the United States troops are going to be fighting wars all over the Middle East and on the subcontinent, the Indian subcontinent. That's not true. This is mostly about the countries doing their own heavy lifting. But here's what we can do. Share intelligence, share technology, share equipment. We have learned a lot how to fight this enemy. Most of these militaries out there are conventional militaries. They have to transition to be able to deal with irregular warfare, just like we have transitioned in the last 13 years. There's much we can do to help.
I want to talk about one last area, and we're beginning to run out of time, and that is, you talk about alliances. Our relationship with our strongest ally in the region, Israel, seems to be at an all-time low after Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, accepted an invitation from House Speaker John Boehner to speak to Congress about the dangers of the Iranian nuclear threat without anybody telling the White House. Bret Baier asked Speaker Boehner about that this week.
Do you think there's some kind of antipathy in this administration towards Netanyahu?
Well, of course there is. They don't even try to hide it.
Ambassador Russ, you have worked on this issue, on the Middle East, Israel, the Palestinians, almost your entire career, and yet I want to put up some of the comments that were being made this week. Put them up on the screen. A senior administration official says of Netanyahu, he spat in our face publicly. Another top official tells the New York Times Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Ron Dermer, repeatedly placed Mr. Netanyahu's political fortunes above the relationship between Israel and the United States. How serious is this breach?
Well, look, I think it is serious because obviously President Obama is going to be there for another almost 2 years. Whoever emerges in the Israeli election is going to, in a sense, be dealing with an administration, at least as it relates to this prime minister, where there's a profound sense of distrust, and there's a sense that the prime minister has made a decision, in a sense, not to work with the administration, but to work with the Congress. And in a sense, beyond that, to make it a partisan issue, not an American issue. Israel in this country has been not a Republican issue, not a Democratic issue, but an American issue. That's profoundly in our interest and in Israel's interest to preserve that.
That seems to be falling apart right now.
Right now, I think that's put under more risk than we've seen before.
30 seconds, final thought, Senator Ayotte.
Final thought, I think there's still bipartisan support in Congress for Israel, and I think the real issue is concerns that these negotiations, there's already been too much conceded.
You're talking about with Iran.
Absolutely. Just the Senate Banking Committee on a strong bipartisan vote voted out additional sanctions this week. The Congress would like a say on this agreement because many on both sides of the aisle are concerned that we have a strong, verifiable agreement that really ends their nuclear program. And that goes back to, I think, the Prime Minister's concerns about too much has been conceded already. And so I think you'll find some bipartisan support in the Congress for the concerns that the Prime Minister has about the ongoing negotiations with Iran.
Senator Ayotte, General Keane, Ambassador Ross, thank you all so much. Thank you for coming in today and helping us understand what I think is a really grievous situation. Thank you.